Hey, common scientists. We are coming to you this week with the topic of language. So we'll get to talk a little bit about maybe some different languages that we're passionate about, maybe a little bit about origins of language or acquisition of language. It's a huge topic, so I'm sure there will be some twists and turns in the conversation today as common scientists. So I want to preface, as common scientists, of course, the key word is common. Our goal is to come to the table with some ideas and research and thoughts and to refine and understand each other better. That might turn out as a debate and or some truth-seeking, as Aidan might say, as it turned out a little bit last week, and or just a really deep conversation about something that we all genuinely care about. But the goal, of course, is to refine and understand each other better and understand the world better as common scientists. So with this week for language, I'm going to kick it off right away to Aidan, and I think he's got a quote for us.
The limits of language are the limits of one's world. And that's a quote by Ludwig Wittgenstein. I'm going to butcher his last name, and he is an Austrian-British philosopher. I'm not familiar so much with his work, but this was a quote I came across in my research for the language cast. And yeah, I mean, it provoked a lot of thought in me. Dre, do you have any responses, or what do you think he meant in that quote?
First and foremost, shout out to Ludwig. There's a lot of great Ludwigs out there. My middle name is Ludwig, but I'm not saying I'm one of those greats. I'm just saying there's,
Wait,
there's
actually?
a trend. Yeah.
Andre
Are you serious?
Ludwig?
Huh?
No.
Wow.
Yeah, that's my middle name.
That's nuts. How?
Jeez, so narrow-minded.
Clearly.
Your middle name?
Yeah.
Really? Are you serious?
I'm dead ass.
You're not lying on cast.
No cap.
Thought
Wow.
you were sharing with us.
No, my middle name is Ludwig.
Andre Ludwig Arnett.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's the origin of that?
Just
Like,
love me
just
some
thought it was a
Germanic
cool
culture.
name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. The more you know.
My mom is adopted. So all of my kids, so my family is Native American. My mom's Native American. All of her kids, for some reason, have French names. I don't know if that's like a French influence from like the Louisiana Purchase, all that, like France owning. I don't know why, but all of like Andre, Letitia, and Deshaun all come from French origin. That's my siblings under my mom. And her middle name is Renee, also a French name. But she was adopted by German parents, German couple. So my middle name comes from my German grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah, and like our birth name, whatever, was like Kaiser. My birth name was Kaiser, but then changed to my father's name. So it would have made more sense, I guess, if it was Andre Ludwig Kaiser. It'd be very German.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
But now it's like French, German, and then weird, probably Americanized Arnett. I don't know where that comes from, but
Yeah. Wow.
yeah.
The more you know.
Yeah. I know.
So Ludwig Wittgenstein. So again, that quote is, the limits of language are the limits of one's world.
Yes. That quote is obviously like super inspirational. Like, it just sounds tight, right? It's like, oh yeah. And like, you obviously, like, as a English teacher, I'm like, every day, kids, the limit of your words is the limit of your world, all that type of stuff. And they're like, what are you talking about, Mr. Arnett? We don't know what you're talking about. But I'm like, you'll learn soon. Like, the slaves wouldn't have been freed if Frederick Douglass didn't write that novel. They wouldn't have been freed if all those abolitionists weren't writing in the papers, all that good stuff. But I think there's a lot of truth to it, of course, with that example. Also with the ability to express yourself and feel like you are an agent of being outside of the prison that could be your body and mind. However, I, of course, don't think it's like literally true. Like, the limit of your words or language is not literally like in the limit of your world, like, because you think like we think in words, you and I, Aidan, but Lauren over here, right? You think in like images predominantly, right?
Yeah.
So of course you have a completely different world and perception and experience than we do.
I hear you, and on the one hand, I think that that makes a lot of sense, but on the other hand, I can experience in my head something that I can really sometimes struggle to put words to, and in that way, my world, my ability to explain my world, which like exists only in my head, right? My perceptions of the external world exist only because I interpret them in my head.
In words.
Right. And so if I'm going to communicate my ideas to someone and I don't think in words, I sometimes feel like I am more limited because I don't have words always to express something that might be really emotionally driven or have just much more complexity than words could possibly describe. And in that way, I sometimes think that my world specifically is limited by words, especially.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense too in light of your blog that's dropping soon.
Yeah. And so that reminds me, I'm going to preface this. Well, I'm not going to preface it. So that reminds me of something that I had actually written down in my notes during my research is so Temple Grandin, and this is a nice throwback to our veganism episode.
Mm-hmm.
She is an incredible animal rights activist and has done a lot for the improvement of factory farming conditions, whether or not they are morally or ethical or not. Like, she's definitely done a lot for reducing the suffering that does exist in those environments, and she attributes it to her autism, which is associated with thinking more in pictures. And so has struggled socially because she struggles to communicate her ideas across to people. However, she has been more attuned. She describes experiences of being more attuned to her environment and thus being able to help design it in a way that would be less stressful for cattle, like seeing a shiny object that might reflect off and blind them, that a person who might think more in words does not notice. So I thought that was just, anyways, yeah.
So that sounds like an example of somebody whose world is not limited by their language.
Or it is, her world is both, yeah. It's limited in that she struggles socially with other humans, but she's incredibly attuned to her surroundings and to animals too, because of this thinking in pictures.
Yeah, I don't want to harp on the next thing I'm about to say, but when it comes to autism, which I obviously have no idea, I don't know much about.
Yeah, I don't either. So
propensity to think in images, I would have thought, because aren't they like super left? I thought it was like a super left-brain thing, where it's like a literalism and like a concreteness that people with autism tend to have, which would have made me think that they would have thought more like in like a harder language. I guess I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that just surprised me is all I'm saying. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, let me just briefly speak to that. In the very basic sense of my knowledge, there is a whole spectrum of autism, right? Mm-hmm. And depending on where and what disorders you might have, or disorder you might have, you could end up with more left-brained or right-brained dominance. So okay. I spent a lot of time working with patients who were on the autistic spectrum. Many of them, though, had official diagnoses more similar to mental retardation because of their age. And once you're diagnosed in a system, they don't generally need or feel that it would add to your life to go back and re-diagnose you, since the language has changed over time. But yeah, you can have left-brained or right-brained dominance. Certainly in those who are not linguistically capable, you would expect there to be a right-brain dominance rather than a left-brain dominance.
Yeah.
Oh, someone should maybe explain
What?
left brain and right brain, where that comes from. Ah, the boys are looking at me.
Yeah, you're a big old explainer. You're always helping us out.
Yeah, so common scientists, this is great. Just throw in there of some anatomy and physiology. Your brain is organized into two hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. These two sides of your brain communicate to one another. And so if you put your left hand on the left side of your own head, that would be like your left side, right? And this is a little tricky sometimes because if you're looking at another person, it can be like a little bit backwards. But the left brain is more responsible for speech, and math and numbers are often associated. And then the right brain is more responsible generally for artistic ability. Music is often associated with that side, creativity. So these two strengths or dominances can actually be measured in brain activity. I think I don't want to for sure speak to what type of imaging is done, but this is like a measurable difference where you can see whether people are more like left-brained or right-brained. So with language specifically, Jerry was associating that language might be a more left-brained trait, and in that like potentially have a disconnect in like the story that we just heard. But
Yeah, and I think too when people say like somebody is left-brained or left-brain dominant, that would mean that that person would be more skilled with language and logic, and that's like kind of how it's used colloquially.
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
That would be the word.
All right.
But anyways, language and
It's
using
tough.
it to describe it is tough, and it's difficult to use to describe experiences and phenomena. Dre, when did you? So, I mean, you're a writer. What does language mean to a writer?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I definitely have a very profound appreciation for it. Just like before the podcast, I was talking to you guys about how excited I was for this one. Not that I think I have anything of importance to say, but I'm just like fascinated with language. I think it's so interesting. And as when we were up at Lauren's parents' house months ago, Aidan and I were talking about like thinking in words as opposed to thinking in images, and like not being able to, like those exercises in middle school when the teachers would be like, imagine a red apple, and everybody say, oh, I see a red apple, or I see a beach, and Aidan and I were just in there like, nah, I'm just thinking in words. Like I do not see any red apple in there.
I hear red apple
Right,
in my internal
yeah,
dialogue.
exactly. All I'm doing is saying red apple in my head. That's all I'm doing. There's no red apple in there. It's simply the symbolic, letters. But so because of that, the way that my brain works in that way, that's definitely a very inherent reason of why language is so important to me. And then I truly do believe, like I said, I don't think that quote by Wittgenstein is perfect, but I think you can dismiss it because it's so absolute. But just in general, if you just take it as an inspiration and take it for like in so many aspects of life, I think it's super inspirational. I definitely think poetry and writing and being able to express myself in deeper ways because of the intricacies of the English language has really helped me become who I am and help me express who I feel like I am inside as opposed to how the world saw me, especially as a youth.
Yeah, I would like to echo that. I think for me that I experienced, I definitely had in like a somewhat of a fascination with language, given, like you said, a proclivity to think in language and numbers or whatever. But I went through, like, over time, I learned to put much more effort into my language, because I find it incredibly powerful when I'm able to put the words to what I mean, which when I say that sounds like a simple idea,
Yeah.
but it is incredibly powerful, whether it be in a relationship with a partner or with a friend or in a business transaction or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like we employ legions of lawyers to settle disputes of language,
Mm-hmm.
for this reason, and so it is important to take care with what, or I have found that it is incredibly important for myself to take care with what I say, and it might take me a little more effort and time to get the words out.
Yeah.
However, I've found it to reduce a lot of or at least some of the frustration I've caused in my youth.
You say that like you're no longer youth, you've ascended.
Yeah.
No,
It's definitely a work in progress, and it takes every day to think harder about what I'm saying.
being precise in language is exceptionally challenging, and in addition to being precise in your language, it's extremely challenging to ensure that the listener is understanding you. Right, even in our conversations on the Common Science cast, I don't know that we've had one yet, but there will be times where one of us pose a question to the rest of the group, or to one individual, and we don't have a clue what's being asked, or we're missing some piece of context. Even in our writing, of course, someone might write something and send it to the other two of our Common Science group for some review, and we might not have a clue what's being said. And so you can be precise and do your best to communicate what you are thinking, but what you are thinking in and of itself might be limited by words. So what you are communicating might not ever be understood the same way that you're meaning it to be, which I find extraordinarily fascinating.
Oh yeah, and it took me a lot of trial and error and continual trial and error to realize that there is an extraordinary difference between yeah, I mean, there's like I see obviously there's many complexities going on with like the conveying your thoughts or feelings or whatever, but there is definitely the compressing of your emotion or thought or state and that is going on in your brain and your neurophysiology into the words itself. And then it's also like learning beyond that, taking it to another level, packaging it in a way that somebody else can digest. I think it is an incredibly hard skill, but it is a skill, and it's something that can be developed over time.
Absolutely. I think now seems like as good a time as any to highlight why language is so challenging. Some of the reasons why it might be so challenging to convey our thoughts and feelings. And I came across some research from a Swede in Germany, Michael Eriksson. We'll make sure to link this in the show notes. But the first thing he talks about is how language is linear and thoughts are not. So when I say that, language has to be connected, like one word, then the other, into a sentence, and then one sentence in front of another, so it creates this linear story, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you think of a page written, you can see the image really well, right? One word after the other. However, thoughts and feelings don't happen like that. I don't know, common scientists, if you guys can relate to ever having a feeling and someone asks you what's on your mind, and there are just so many conflicting emotions and feelings and toilings that are happening in your head that you couldn't possibly express it. That's because the way we think is not linear. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. It could be like tetrahedron, or it could be
Yeah.
like just the words are all, the ideas are all piled on top of each other. It's not like cleaning up on a page or anything like that. It could be scribbly. I think, yeah, I understand the gist of what you're saying, and it is definitely it can be troublesome at times, and I think for some people with a little bit more of a gifted mind, like maybe like a synesthete or like a savant, or just people who are kind of trending that direction, who kind of have this different type of mode of thinking, I think it can be like really, really freeing. And obviously it can make, like, a lot of great minds, they think in these really obscure ways. But then, as you're saying, Lauren, there's obviously the the other way where it's like, I don't know what is going on in there. Like, I don't know how to exactly express this. I don't know how am I, the words are coming out, I can feel them, I hear them, but whatever I'm saying, you are not feeling the same thing. You're not understanding what I'm saying. And it can be frustrating.
Yeah. So he goes on to explain a few other concepts of some of the problems with language. To explain that language is also ambiguous, meaning that we don't always know how or what an idea means to an individual person. So language is piled up with understanding that's driven by culture and family and background. So what I might say to Aidan could mean something different based on his upbringing and understanding of the world. And then that language does not provide words for all concepts. Language is not understood uniformly. Language is poor at communicating emotions. So those are all of the pieces of some of the limitations of language. And there are some proposed solutions, but they're really way out there.
Yeah, I think that just speaks to why there is immense adoration for someone like a Charles Dickens or some other Dostoevsky, these household names that are as far as authors go, there is immense respect for them, and also a lot of other people like would like to be a writer or an author, or at least say they would like to be. Whether or not they're willing to go through the effort is the barrier in a lot of ways, because it is a grind to get your ideas out there in a precise manner. And I think that's kind of what this conversation makes me think about as far as the limitations go, is how forgiving a conversation can be as opposed to written communication. Like, written communication is, like Lauren said, so linear, whereas a conversation, I feel like, is more branching, maybe more mimics the behavior of a brain and how it responds in that. And I say that when I think of like subtle cues, and also the ability to like nod and read other people's responses, or to see people with their eyes glaze over and then
shout out to the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Because you're so right. In my research, I saw that 70 to 93% of language is nonverbal. Most scientists agree that it's between those ranges, but 70 to 93%, that's a huge percentage of nonverbal communication that's happening in addition to the words. So if you take away the nonverbal communication, a big part of the communication is missing, right? So if you leave just the words, written communication, lots of opportunity for misunderstanding.
So along with the words, you're also like when the words go in that scenario, the 70 to 90%, whatever. When you take away the words, you're also taking away like the intonations and all that too. Okay.
I would think I would think
because
that
it's
that's
verbal.
what's right.
Yeah, as opposed to like just the concrete meaning of the words.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean that's very true for sure. I mean, I don't know how. I'm obviously struggling to accept that because there's so much that's in tone that I'm like, I don't know, like, but I guess maybe tone's only like 5%, maybe it is that, I don't know, but
whatever the percentage is.
Yeah, interesting. It sounds like 95% of the stats are made up on the spot. That's what this is like. This is Mike Erickson. Who's saying this? I'm mostly joking. Like I've heard these stats before. I'm only kind of contemplating out loud. Like kind of. Maybe we'll see. Time will tell.
Yeah, I think the idea of nonverbal is probably even up for debate. Like what is nonverbal? What does that include? And specifically this article that I found, right? Like what do they define to be nonverbal? That's already part of the problem with language, is understanding exactly what the argument is. But
yeah.
Do you guys think that language grows or can be invented?
Grows or can be invented? Language in and of itself, not a language, correct? Just language.
Again, this is the difficulty of language.
Yeah.
Well, there are two. This might clear up the question. There are two primary definitions for language. One, the principal method of human communication, consisting of words used in a structured and conventional way and conveyed by speech, writing, or gesture. Two, a system of communication used by a particular country or community. I think what Jay was asking was that you're talking about
definition
more of
1 or 2.
Yeah, definition 1.
Let's start with definition 1.
Okay. Okay. And then you also asked 2 questions. You said grows or created. So I mean I obviously think that it evolved, so therefore it can grow.
Yeah, it evolved.
Like language evolved in us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not quite. It seems like a lot of people are considering what animals do language. It just isn't as advanced as ours. Like we have a very special kind of language that has predominantly a thing called displacement, which means you can talk about things that aren't in your present. Right? You can talk about the past, future, objects that you can't see, etc. Yeah. Animals can't really do that for the most part, it seems.
Yeah, and beyond that too, the other distinctive piece of our language that I have come across, at least our spoken and written, like our verbal linguistic our linguistic language. It sounds a little redundant, but the one of the distinctions is like we talked a bit about the limits of language, but the limitless nature in how we can combine like words into a sentence. And again, I'm not going to do this thought justice, and you might need to go and refer to some of Steven Pinker's work, but our ability to combine words into phrases and then combine those phrases into sentences and then combine those sentences into paragraphs, like, is for all intensive purposes infinite. And
yeah, for sure.
Whereas like,
I would say infinite and entropic, though. So infinitely expanding, but expanding towards disorder. And in that, I would say that language can be invented and it is evolving, which is what makes language so challenging.
Expanding to disorder, okay. Maybe expanding to absurdity. Disorder? I'm not, maybe. But yeah, people don't, I do like that you brought that up. People don't talk about the infinity of like letters, right? They talk about like the infinity of like discounting. But it's like you could make an infinite amount of There's impossible to make the longest sentence of all time, right? You can always make it longer.
Yeah,
But,
and
yeah.
beyond that, even it's like almost. It's, I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't have a source for this, but like the repetition of a sentence is almost non-existent. Like, if not non-existent, like any sentence that I ever come up with is almost guaranteed to be different than any sentence Dre will ever come up with in his lifetime.
I don't think that's true. I think that you have plenty of sentences that have never been said, that might not have been said before. But I've definitely said he went to the store before, and people have said he went to the store. Is that not in direct repetition of what you said?
Yeah, I mean, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, I would need to do more common sense.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
I disagree.
What is this inconvenient?
No, I agree that, yes, you probably have said a sentence that no one may have never said before, or perhaps is just unique to you.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, but this is kind of like a rather hypothetical. Yes, there are sentences that someone else has never said before. That's true. Lauren and yeah, I also agree that I do believe that language can be created and grow and evolve. Both definitions. What's your response to that? Why do you ask this question?
I asked this question because I read this book, In the Land of Invented Languages, by I would have to open my computer to figure out what the author's name is. In the Land of Invented Languages, by Erica Okrent. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce her last name.
Okay.
But she talks about how there's this consistent theme of individuals or even groups of people like coming up with their own languages. And one of those might be Klingon, like the Star Trek language. And then another might be Braille. And so there's like this consistent theme of languages emerging, and people like having a desire to come up with some sort of system of describing the world that might be outside of what is conventionally wise. And she also goes into many, many examples of these languages that just like, ended up in a dusty pile of papers in the guy's attic somewhere. That's where that comes from, is like this kind of documentation that she brought up. Klingon is now offered on Duolingo.
Whoa.
In its
cool.
beta version. So
that's cool.
Just
I didn't know
shouting that out. So if you want to learn Klingon to be able to speak alien with people.
Shout out Duo. What
possible.
about Elvish? Token Elvish?
Elvish, I don't think is on there yet.
Okay. Okay. That's really cool. Yeah. There are language is definitely really, really interesting, and you guys have both seen the movie Arrival, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about all these new languages, and in the movie Arrival, spoiler alert, it's an amazing movie. If you haven't seen it, skip probably about 2 minutes of this podcast. Don't exit out the podcast. Finish the podcast. Skip maybe about 2 minutes or so forward, 3 minutes maybe, and then go watch the movie Arrival afterwards. But so in the movie, there's this link. These aliens come and they're like all weird and tentacly and all that type of stuff. You know how we always portray aliens these days, and we're trying to communicate with them. They're trying to communicate with us, we think. So they grab this renowned linguist, and these aliens communicate with these they're kind of like octopussy, so they communicate with this type of ink looking thing and these weird symbols, and we're trying to figure out what they're saying. And by the time the main character discovers, or when she discovers the language, or uncovers like how to speak it and what it means and all that, she essentially then, the language, it allows her to be, what would you say, beyond time, outside of time, right? She can experience like the future before the past, Like she can do all these different things.
Yeah.
So essentially, the language was not tied to past, present, or future. And so, in that sense, you could simultaneously understand the past, the present, and the future.
Yes.
Is what was my understanding of the movie. Harder to explain in words, my friends,
Yeah.
than for you to go watch the movie. So
Yeah.
go check it out.
When
it
I
was
first
mind-blowing.
when I first brought it up, I thought I was going to explain that pretty well, and I realized the limitations of my language.
I think the one main piece as far as transcending the past, present, and the future, that was conveyed in Arrival, is that the alien language is circular.
Right.
Whereas human language is linear. So in human language, if it's linear, inherently there's going to be a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
Whereas if the alien language, which is portrayed in Arrival, is circular, there is no beginning nor end. So
yeah, great point. So a lot of this, we're almost struggling, not really struggling, but we keep getting enticed back into this idea of like the same thing that we start with the Wittgenstein thing. It's like language can can free you and like, you know, give you like the sky's the limit, but it can also really limit you in certain ways. So we're kind of going back and forth between being like, yes, as a kid, writing and language really helped me express myself and become who I am, but also it's not really good at explaining feelings. So a lot of this is related to an hypothesis called and I think I'm pronouncing this right, but the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Did you guys come upon this in your research?
I did not. Please enlighten me.
Okay, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, just a quick dictionary.com says, a hypothesis first advanced by Edward Sapir in 1929 and subsequently developed by Benjamin Whorf, that the structure of a language determines a native speaker's perception and categorization of experience.
Okay, I'm more familiar with that idea in the context of language acquisition theory, which are theories of how we may learn language. There are a couple of different theories out there, and that sounds quite similar to at least one of those theories.
Yeah, there's a couple other terms that are related to or have become like derivatives of it or something too that I've heard as well. I can't think of them off the top of my head. But yeah, this is a super common idea, and you can tell because we keep talking about it in different ways, right? Yep. So this is something that humans are really, really interested in. And sometimes it can be like in layman's terms kind of explained as, there's kind of this argument of like, does your environment or like your brain, etc., does that determine your language, or does your language just kind of determine how you experience things, right? Is your experience determining your language, or is your language determining your experience? And if we go back to our color episode, the ancient Greeks, they didn't have a word for the color blue, I believed. So the sky was like a green, and the sea or a lake was often considered like a black, right? Like a dark. And there's also certain cultures even today where they don't put as much emphasis on, like they don't have, it doesn't, like these discernments between certain colors don't matter as much. So they might not have like a pink. It's just like, that's red. So because it's not important to them, therefore they didn't create a new word for it. Therefore they are also not distinguishing between pink and red as much as we would. We see pink and we don't even really think about it. We're just like, that's pink. Pink means something in our culture. It means a lot, right? Boys blue, girls pink. It means a lot. We went over this in the color episode, and they've also done a lot of studies where there's some evidence that fashion designers can actually see more colors than the average person, because colors mean so much in the fashion industry that their brains and their language have kind of evolved to perceive these small discernments in color.
Okay, I'm going to take this a little meta.
Take it away.
And I appreciate those examples because those were all great examples of something that feels super tangible to me. What's, I think, a lot harder to understand, and maybe if you go watch the movie that I was a little spoiled, but not so much, you got to go check it out. You'll understand it in that context too, but here is something else I happened upon to help us imagine what a world could be like if we could unlock potentially more potential. Wow. If we could unlock more potential in our language. So this is from that same source I mentioned earlier, and he mentions that a solution to some of the problems could be replacing our traditional languages with an artificial construct. Notably, he says that statements in programming languages typically have a unique meaning and are better suited to express thoughts, alas, only in a limited area. The AI concept semantic network provides a good way of writing thoughts down in an at least two-dimensional manner, which allows a greater, if imperfect, focus on interconnections. And after some minor training, it is possible to read such networks just as easily as normal text and to communicate them. So I know that was quite meta and related to programming. So if you have some experience in programming, and Aiden, maybe you can speak to this more, you might understand that concept. But I think it was well put in the fact that you can potentially imagine a communication that is more two-dimensional or three-dimensional or four-dimensional. I thought that was a good way for me to think about and imagine, okay, so we have this linear one-dimensional language, but what if it could have connections that were more complex? And Joe, you mentioned a trapezoid earlier, and we now talked also about like circular language in the movie too.
Mm-hmm.
How cool would it be if we could communicate in more than one dimension, if it wasn't linear, if we could make all of these connections? But right now, the English language certainly does not seem to do that. So I don't know, Aidan, if you want to speak some to the programming.
Yeah, that's a fascinating observation, Lauren. And so for our listeners, a super basic way that we can write something. I mean, you think about your computer screen, right? And it's got like the two dimensions to it, or your phone screen if you only have a phone, or whatever else, like whatever electrical device you have with a screen that has words and images and videos in it. It's only got two dimensions to it. What you can think, one of the most basic things you'll learn in a programming class is what's called a for loop. And so you can say for I in like 1 through 10, print this. And so that sounds meta to a lot of people, but you can say for like each of these numbers 1 through 10, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, print an equal sign. So you can have that in one dimension. You can have that for loop say print an equal sign 10 times from left to right. So the first equal sign is the farthest one to the left. The second equal sign is the next one to the left. Third, the 10th equal sign is the farthest one to the right. What you can do is nest your for loops. So you can put one of these for loops of like the 1 through 10 equal sign inside of the first one. So it'll say like for each of these equal signs, you're going to print it out 10 times to the right and then 10 times down, and then 10 times. So you'll do 10 times to the right, and then you'll go down a line, and then 10 times to the right, and then go down a line, and then 10 times to the right. And that's because you just put one of these like four statements inside of the other one and created then a two-dimensional way of conveying using a one-dimensional language, like
because it expanded both like left and right and up and down at once in one written command.
Yep.
Okay, the for loop. Now I can say I know some programming.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. But yeah, that was something else I was just thinking about in terms of my research, Lauren, and it's cool you brought that up, because too, if you think about language and what we talked about, some of the limits of it, but also some of the limitlessness of it, we think about our computers and how they're able to represent language, images, video, and soon virtual reality and all these things. Those are fundamentally like ones and zeros that have been abstracted away layer by layer. So there's a system called ASCII, which I can't remember what the acronym stands for exactly. It's probably the American Standard Character Index of something, if I had to guess. But if you think about a bit being a 0 or a 1, so one bit of information,
What's a bit?
it's a fundamental unit of information.
Okay.
And a fundamental unit of information is a 0 or a 1, a yes or a no, a true or a false. If you line 8 of those up, that becomes a byte. And so by combining different sets of these zeros and ones, we can make the letter A. Like we can define a set of those zeros and ones. Say it's 000 is the letter A. 010 is the letter B. 100 is the letter C. I'm just making up these sequences right now. But if we continue to abstract these layers away, then we get into things like being able to convey video through these fundamental patterns of ones and zeros. Anyways, yeah.
So
How'd I do on my explanation?
It was amazing.
it was meta for sure. It was
Sugoi.
great. But I think just hearing you talk for our listeners, if none of that made sense, it's okay. What that should show you, though, is that for Aidan, based off of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, he understands the world in ones and zeros more than, I mean, I don't know if you just totally think in ones and zeros, that'd be cool, but like certainly more than me, and probably more than many of our listeners. And so Aiden's reality, right, I think that's kind of what the hypothesis was speaking to, and Jay, you can speak to this more too. Aiden's reality maybe is enhanced, maybe it's just different, but it's certainly, well, odd, I think, but
It's certainly odd.
certainly different, right?
Yeah.
And I would say has added to the way that you view the world. And as Dre had mentioned, taking it back to the ancient, I think, Greeks who didn't have a word for blue, maybe it didn't take away from their world, but also absolutely different.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think to bring that kind of full circle, the power of language and how it allows us to understand our world or not seems to be a theme that really runs deep.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of language styles or perhaps, I don't know if I'll call it deficiency, but maybe like a language style that do add a lot to that culture, but also really, really, really take away and kind of cap them off. Shout out to Wittgenstein. But because there are these Aboriginal groups who, because of the necessity of their environments and of their demands, they speak in a very directional way, right? You guys have heard of these people or no?
Mm-hmm.
So there's multiple groups of people like this, usually like, kind of older type of Aboriginal type of people, where instead of thinking in left and right, forward, back, they think in north, east, west, south. They think directionally, right? 'Cause that's obviously really important in the ancient world specifically. So even if they were going to talk about Aiden's left pant leg, they would say like southwest leg.
Yeah.
If they were going to say, I'm going to go whatever straight, they would just say, I'm going to go whatever direction they're going, east, west, and whatever direction they're facing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? For us, our directions are very subjective and dependent on us. Our straight is always our straight. Theirs is not that way. It's whatever direction they're facing cardinally. So, and even too, so how important direction is to them, this part was really fascinating to me, is they don't they don't say, hey, how are you? They say, hey, where are you going? And then you respond, I'm going north, or I'm going northeast. That's what you say. That's how important direction is to them. That's how much it has shaped their world. And there's a number of these Aboriginal groups. So that's kind of really cool, right? So they obviously, like, for me, I have no idea. I'll look right at the sun. I have no idea where north is.
Yeah.
That's how that is how inept I am with direction, which is fine. I got, GPS, but that's how it is kind of shaped their world, which is cool. But a lot of these groups that have these, or I don't know if there's just a ton, but I know there's at least one in Australia. They also, I believe it's the same group, also don't really have a number system. Like they don't have the word 8 or 5 or 6. So they don't just count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pencils, right? They don't, that concept doesn't really apply to them. So where I'm saying there's a huge cap on them, a really unfortunate one, is in mathematics, right? If you don't have the number 4, how far can your society go? How good can your architecture be? How much can you fathom astrophysics or
But do
calculus?
they need to?
It depends. See, well, now we're gonna get all like philosophical. It depends on what their goals are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they're perfectly happy. I don't know that much about the people.
But yeah, it's a fair observation that, like, if you don't have, if there is no concept for the number 4, it's gonna be really hard to do addition.
Right. So I suppose the value judgment of me saying it's unfortunate, I see it as unfortunate as a member of this culture and this language. Perhaps it doesn't decrease their happiness at all, or likelihood to reproduce and pass on their genetics. So maybe it doesn't matter as much to them.
Yeah.
But fascinating. But it is still inhibiting.
It is fascinating that a common theme that I think has been brought up between the Leftbrained comment about that being more linguistically as well as mathematically oriented, as well as just you bringing up the concept of the number 4. And it is fascinating that a lot of these language theorists also tend to be mathematicians, the Ludwig Wittgenstein, I think he was, a mathematician as well as a language theorist. I do think that there are immense overlaps in terms of having something that represents a concept, a variable in mathematics, or a word in language, and then having a set of rules that connect these variables in mathematics or words in language. Like in mathematics, you obviously have like operators or functions like addition, subtraction, multiplication, but in sentences we have different syntactical rules, like how you can create a complete sentence where you have a noun, a verb, and then a subject. But there are immense parallels there. That I just find. Yeah.
I agree.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. Is mathematics, or can mathematics be seen as a language there into like another world or another dimension, similar to like the Arrival aliens?
I'm a little biased, but yeah, I would say so. I would say that I think so. I subscribe to the mathematical universe hypothesis, which I suppose is a little less like alternate universe, like a describer of an alternate, or like a language into an alternate universe, and more of a language that like is the foundation of our universe.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where we see a lot of these, or why we see a lot of these parallels between math and language, and math and other subject areas.
Yeah, because they're both just symbols, right? They're both just representations of some kind of truth or thing in the world. And I think, but I don't know, I guess I'm with you there. And I know we kind of had this conversation in a different podcast, but now I'm reaffirming. I think I'm with you there because, like we were saying, with the limitations of language, math clears a lot of that up, right? We can't really speak about like a lot of these ideas, these concepts about like speed of light and this and that, and the math, because we have words like wormhole and black hole and all this, but when you really break things down to especially like quantum levels and stuff like that, when I'm listening to people like Kaku and those guys, or Kiku Machio, when I'm listening to them, they're saying like, yeah, some of these concepts can really only be understood with math. You can't really put it into words. If all we had was words, we would never understand the universe.
Right.
It's this mathematical language which really unlocks the secrets.
And another just some further evidence I would say is like what's so freaking cool in my eyes about math is like if I write math here, some guy in Russia who doesn't speak a word of English can understand it.
The universal language.
Yeah.
Not to believe that.
He smiles.
Yeah, I smile. At least amongst humans who have a concept for the number 4.
Any other concepts or ideas or quotes or anything that you guys thought was really interesting?
I was curious if you guys thought that our society overemphasized or underemphasized syntax versus semantics, or semantics versus syntax. So I'll clarify. Syntax is the grammatical structure of text, whereas semantics is the meaning being conveyed behind the text. And I am just curious if you guys think one or the other is overemphasized or underemphasized, and maybe in that question we can add math if that's a part of what you believe is over or underemphasized in American society.
Is overemphasized or underemphasized in American society? Syntax or semantics? I think they're so intertwined. Like the structure of a sentence and the meaning of the words in that sentence, because the meaning of the words in that sentence are so contextual or related to context. Like I think they're so incredibly intertwined. My thought would be just that we don't emphasize language enough, and the importance of it, and the importance of being precise in language. And so I guess that's where I would land on that.
When it comes to semantics, I might have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. However, when you're talking about, when I think of that question with semantics, and what I'm saying, this might not make sense. I might not be understanding what semantics really are. But one thing is when you start studying other languages and you just you at least understand some words, some sounds in those languages. Once you start hearing those same sounds in your own language, you start to make those connections, right? Not only do you have to filter through that sound in your first language, but now you have to filter through that sound second, third, fourth language. And usually if you're fluent, you're not thinking about it, right? It's just like it's happening, right? You're not conscious about it. So when I'm getting that, and when I'm thinking about like putting too much emphasis on a semantic, I think that many doors can be opened by knowing multiple different languages. And even though like that word and that sound is very arbitrary and contrived, you can find certain connections through sounds, through different languages, and not just like when they have like the same Latin root, but studying. I really wish I could think of an example right now, but when I've studied some Japanese, I've seen some words that I'm like, that sounds really Spanish. Like that word sounds just like a Spanish word, and they have really similar meanings. Right? There's things like that that are really interesting to me. And when it comes to the syntactical part, I think probably yes, there's too much emphasis on it. The Western world, so beginning with, I don't know if the Greek language is like right to left, but I'm guessing it would be. Judaism, I believe, is right to left. Obviously, we're left to right. A lot of Western languages are. Actually, I don't know if that's true, but English is at least. So I think that is an issue because whether it's because we think linearly or whether our language is linear, chicken and the egg, those things are kind of trapping us in this time versus like the Japanese, right, up to down or whatever. And there's different ways and they have these symbols and whatever Eastern cultures. But they also have, a lot of Eastern cultures also have a more circular way of thinking about life and time. So I think, yes, in a way, we do put too much emphasis on it. And it is kind of going back to kind of the superior warp. It's like our language is kind of warping the way we experience the universe and the way we think about it.
So we should start writing English in circles now.
Yeah, tetrahedrons, all that. Like, just,
yeah.
Who knows what could happen?
No, I
Shout out to a future blog post that maybe you could write because that sounds hard.
But yeah, I hear you though. I think there is one, speaking to the commonalities of sounds in language, there is this Ethio jazz musician named Miklet Adero, I believe, and we can link her TED Talk in the show notes. But she brings up how much her natural environment influences her music, whether it be from birdsong to the sound of dropping a pan on in her kitchen. And I have to think that environment has played a huge role in the development of specific words. I think of, and like the meaning that is then subsequently conveyed. I think about the word. I'm thinking back to our profanity episode, and the word fuck, and how like sharp that word is, and how much then emotion comes out when it's used. I'm also thinking about words like the word bang, and that's used to describe a loud noise in the US, and like how much that I can't quite put words to what I feel when I hear that word, but I there's something between this short and succinctness of it, and the parallel between that and like a loud bang of a car behind you that might scare you. Like there seems to me some sorts of parallels between the vocalizations that we make and our natural environment around us. But
yeah, no question. I think that's very true with onomatopoeia and like even like the word hiss and all that. Like you kind of extend it a little bit. Right? Sound like a hiss, like kind of like you would imagine a snake would. And even too, there's some words that I hear that aren't necessarily onomatopoeia. I don't think they're considered, but they sound like it to me. Like for example, actually, I'm gonna do an experiment. What do you guys think the word mellifluous means?
Mellifluous.
Or malevolent. What do you guys think that word means? Like if I said that word is malevolent.
I'm gonna say bad sounding.
Okay.
I'm gonna say negatively connotating.
Okay, I think so. I think I messed it up. I think the word is mellifluous, but I kind of mixed it up. I kind of made you guys think of malevolent. That's what I'm guessing. So I'm an idiot. But what I was trying to, so the word mellifluous, I think it is.
How do you spell it? Do you have any idea?
I know how to. I think it's mellifluous. I know how to spell, but the reason why I'm messing up is because I keep thinking it's vent, but I'm pretty sure it's fluous. But whatever. My point is that word to me sounds like its definition.
What is its definition?
Have a rich, smooth flow.
Yes, like that word flows,
Mellifluous.
and then sometimes they'll say like that word
Mellifluous.
means like a word is like honey, right? It's like a flowing, whatever, like that, and like that word like to me sounds like what it means. It sounds like onomatopoeia when I hear it. Obviously,
Yeah.
my tongue is kind of messing me up there, but
if I said mellifluous,
so yeah,
that
right,
sounds
like
kinda
flowing,
kind
and
of
it's like-
sweet, musical, pleasant to hear.
yeah.
Yeah.
For our listeners, spelled mellifluous.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that word even a far more complex word than bang, but that kind of sounds to me like when I first heard that I was like, huh, and then I saw the definition. I was like, that's what I would guess that word means, right?
Yeah.
My bad for messing you guys up in that little experiment.
No
But,
worries.
yeah, so that is a really interesting concept. I do really like that. I put some thought into that stuff, but that was kind of cool the way that you kind of spun that into it. One other thing that really interests me in my research, my bad, got away from the mic there, is so Lara Boroditsky did a TED Talk, and she talked about a lot of cool things that were in regards to language, but one of the things she talked about, I don't know if it was just a syntactical thing or just in general how we describe events, but she said that in English, we really like to attribute responsibility to things versus in a language in a culture like Spanish, they don't as much. So for example, if I stood up and I accidentally knocked over Aiden's mug and it broke, you guys would be like, oh yeah, like Dre broke my mug. But in a culture like Spanish, in their language, it wouldn't make as much sense for them. They would say, no, he stood up and the mug broke. So there's way less blame put on things like that, specifically with like they consider intent when it comes to blame. And that's really interesting to me because as soon as I heard that concept, I was like, that's fascinating because that has a lot of criminal implications. How we think about accidents, how we think about responsibility, how we think about agency. And one of the things is I'm becoming more and more of a skeptic of free will, and I'm becoming more and more sensitive to the prison system and the plight of prisons and the state of that, specifically in America. And I think it seems very, very correlated. Our desire to blame people and give people agency in their mistakes or in their decisions, which are really, really influenced by so many chemicals and environmental factors. But since we want to simplify it down to like this person did this and is in full control, we can sentence people to death and we can sentence people to 8 years in prison, life, etc., etc. And I'm trying to imagine and help create and shift that Overton window into a society where it is not okay to lock people in cages for the rest of their life, except in some rare situations.
Yeah, I think so having grown up learning Spanish in school, that's an apt observation that I had never considered before. But I do think that there's a lot of truth in it, and I think it reminds me to so Dre and I went out for Chipotle earlier today, and we were talking about common science and the ability for the ability of science, or the usefulness of science in finding common ground with others. And one aspect of science that I've griped about at times, but I'm also possibly seeing the benefit of it now, is a lot of how we write like a lot of how journal articles are written is very much with the individual removed from the writing. So it's like the experiment was performed on this many whatever it is. Like it's starting to move more towards more back towards using some of the like first person, like the I and the we, but for the longest time it was very much hammered into scientists to avoid using I and we and to try to remain objective, they would say, and to focus or to just subtract that out and say like there was this experiment or whatever else. And one thing about science that was inspiring in like the COVID pandemic in particular is that there was a lot of there was a lot of cooperation amongst scientists and sharing of data before even like a lot of governments and other institutions got on board with the sharing. And I'm not sure if there is any corollary there between the language, the emphasis of the language being more on the thing than like a person causing something. Anyways, yeah, I just thought that was an illuminating observation, Dre, and I appreciate you for bringing it up.
No doubt.
In a remarkably long-winded
Absolutely
response.
Fascinating to think of. I think you might be onto something. I don't think that it's true in the context of science personally, because I think scientists are trained from day one to be competers and to not work together. I think the COVID example was something entirely different, but yeah, I also appreciate the example. I think we would be remiss as common scientists if we didn't at least mention the two areas of your brain that are most responsible for language as we're coming to a bit of a close. And there are, two areas that are primarily responsible that I'm going to mention. There is Broca's area and Wernicke's area. They are two chunks of your brain, like kind of around your temple area on the left side of your head. And Broca's area, I always think Broca, Boca. So that is where speech.
What does boca mean?
Boca is Spanish for mouth, and Broca, Boca.
See, that's some contextual stuff.
I know. Thank you for calling me out. So that's where motor ability for speech production happens. So Broca, Boca means mouth. Now you're learning language and science and Spanish, all sorts of language happening. Broca, Boca, talking. And then Wernicke's area, and I always think of Wernicke, what are you saying? So Wernicke's area is responsible for understanding context and meaning. So these two areas, Broca, Boca, speech production, and then Wernicke's area, what are you saying, to comprehend and explain speech. So there are also some other pathways in your brain that are involved when you're speaking and when you are comprehending, but just two small pieces physiologically that can maybe help give you a little bit of a picture too, in addition to all of this philosophy, how our bodies are also working to understand the craziness that is language.
Yeah. When it comes to Broca's and Wernicke's too, an interesting thing, one of the kind of how we discovered exactly what they do was through damage to them. Mm-hmm. So when the Broca's area was damaged, we realized that they could understand speech, but they couldn't speak, and I think maybe couldn't write as well. And then when it came to Wernicke's, when that was damaged, we noticed that they could no longer comprehend what people were saying, but they could like write and speak in a kind of, I don't know, like they could physically speak. But and what else was I going to say with that? You look like you were saying something, Aidan. Take it away.
I just like to say, yeah, Dre, it's wild how little we do know about the brain and how often when we find things out about the brain, it happens to be because of some accident or disease or some abnormal situation that can then hint at what the region is used for. The other thing that I was thinking about, to connect it back to the ones and zeros being a fundamental bit of information, a neuron fires or it doesn't. So a neuron can be
I love me
a
some
1
action potentials.
or a 0. And yeah.
What do you call a failed initiation potential then? A 0.5? Or you just, it doesn't matter?
If it's failed, then it didn't happen, so it's a 0.
Didn't happen. Doesn't exist.
They change the influx, and enough failed initiations together create an initiation. You just don't care about the submolecular relationship.
Is that
Well,
true? Enough failed initiations will create.
Well, so like if
it
you're
would be
coming off
wouldn't
of
it be a
few...
partial initiation?
No, because it's all or nothing response in the nervous system. You
Mhm.
either have depolarization or you don't.
Yeah. And if enough of these failed ones happen,
Like, so if you were coming off of a failed initiation, you would already have a slightly more positive threshold. So you could have several stimuli that might add into depolarization of the cell, but that's just a specific.
So yeah, okay.
It's called summation.
It's still
sorry, I got excited.
The neuron still either fired or it didn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a 1 or a 0.
Things either happen or they don't.
Semantics. Okay. Any last comments, questions, or concerns?
First of all, what is that thing? What, Heidegger's cat? No, that's not Heidegger's cat. What's that?
Schrodinger's cat?
Schrodinger's cat, yeah. Final thoughts you said?
Yeah, let's hear all about
You're
Schrodinger's
gonna
No,
bring
that's
up-
not. Schrodinger's cat is
You're
not.
just gonna shout it out without saying anything about it.
No.
All right, do your googling and common scientists, and you can look up Schrodinger's cat and learn more.
Yeah, definitely. So my final thought is, if you have never heard, you guys, obviously, in our audience, of the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, it is some amazing art. It's a YouTube channel and a website, but go to the YouTube channel so you can actually see the images and hear the creator explain these words. So essentially, I don't think he created all the words, but I think he created some of them. But there are these kind of obscure words to describe feelings that we don't always have words for. So that is going back to, kind of this whole podcast, but going back to the beginning, figuring out, like, am I angry? Am I sad? No, I'm not sad. I'm not angry. What am I? But if it's kind of a failure, it isn't a failure of feeling. It's a failure of language that we don't have a word for this feeling. So one example is a word called onism, which is defined as the frustration of being stuck in just one body that inhabits only one place at a time, which is like standing in front of the departure screen at an airport, flickering over with strange place names like other people's passwords, each representing one more thing you'll never get to see before you die. And all because, as the arrow on the map helpfully points out, you are here.
Yeah, that's an obscure sorrow. But
it's a feeling.
It's a feeling.
Yeah, if you go to his YouTube channel, and that was more of a description, like that was kind of laying out more of how he would have broken it down and giving you more detail in his YouTube video.
Yeah.
Usually the definitions are a little bit more succinct, but he goes through all these feelings that we do definitely have, or at least I've had so many of them, but I've never really been able to express them because I don't know the word. It's kind of like, you're kind of like, oh, like, you know, when you kind of, and you explain them in these long ways, but you don't have that
It's
one
on the
word.
tip of my tongue,
Right.
But I don't have,
So, Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, I think, for word lovers, language lovers, feelers, human beings. Check it out.
Absolutely. Well, common scientists, we've been all over the place with the theories and triumphs and struggles of language, and I hope that this week gave us a little bit of a more clear, maybe more obscure picture of what language looks like in our day-to-day lives and how we as common scientists can explore meaning in our lives with our language.
Hey common scientists, hope you enjoyed the cast. Thanks for investing in common science. We hope it brought as much value to you as it did to us.
To learn more, smash the subscribe button and visit our website, commonscientists.com, where you can read our blog, join our email newsletter, and follow us on social media.
Finally, if you like what we have to say, you can absolutely support us on Patreon. We could always use more support. You can navigate there also from our website, commonscientists.com, common scientists with an S, so that we can continue cultivating a community of common scientists.